Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, lace up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 157 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. I'm alone in my house today. This is like a miracle for me. I'm never alone in my house, like at a time or with enough time to get anything done. In the ever ongoing, always paradoxical reality of me, I was happy this morning at 7:15 to have 22 people in a CrossFit class because I, quote unquote, never see people. And several hours later, I'm happy to be all by myself in my house. So there it is, the reality that is Barb Higgins. We are 10 weeks into season 9 and up to step 9 of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous as related to through spirituality in its book, Breathing Underwater by Richard Rohr. I have to tell you, I have generated so much conversation with this podcast season and with being more diligent and vigilant about posting, especially on Instagram stories, people are reaching out and responding back. And I think it's because religion is oftentimes something that's fought over on social media, especially politically speaking. So anything that mentions religion or maybe looks like it's discrediting religion or making fun of it, it's going to garner a response. Sometimes an irritated response is just as good as a supportive response because it generates conversation. And I've had some amazing conversations, I have to say. The other thing is addiction in general is a huge, conversation starter. And so I have tried to reach out more and more to people I know who are in recovery. Say, hey, take a listen and see what you think, because I would love to have some feedback from people that are actually in AA working with 12 steps. The way I'm teaching it in this series is obviously through this book and allowing listeners, because not all of you are recovering alcoholics in AA, to insert something else. If alcohol isn't your issue, what is it? What's your issue? So step 9 is a big one. And it really sort of begins the process of gearing into why we have the 12 steps in the first place, meaning Alcoholics Anonymous or recovery programs. And step 9 is about making amends. And so it reads like this. Step 9, make direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure you or others. So this is a pretty forward-thinking, profound example of apology. I know as kids, we're encouraged, if you do something wrong, you must apologize right away. And for the most part, that's true. If you make a mistake or you hurt somebody or you break something or whatever, and you realize you've made the mistake, you must apologize to the person you hurt. This makes sense. But sometimes the hurt is systemic or years long or so deep that even talking to the person is an impossibility. And lots of the reasons alcoholics become alcoholics are traumatic memories and events in their lives. So how do you apologize to that? So here's an example of an apology that would not work. Perhaps you have a rapist in jail and the rapist realizes, what a mistake. I did a horrible thing. I should never have done this. Calling the rape victim to apologize would be a horribly traumatic experience for the victim. Even though it's an apology, that victim doesn't need to be bothered by the rapist. Now, would it be helpful to the victim to know that their rapist had remorse? Maybe, but how would the victim know that that remorse was genuine? So this is an amends that rapist could make by the rest of his prison sentence, attending classes, mental health classes, and never hurting or raping anyone again. Like sometimes your amends, your apology has to be in your behavior. I used an example once that if you are mean to animals, say you used to hit your dog and your dog is long dead, right? You can't dig your dog up and apologize, but you can never hit another dog. That's sort of that example of, unless the apology would be as painful as the transgression. It's interesting. I know when I was 14, turning 15, and my mother was remarrying my dad, he wrote me like a 5-page letter. I have it in a box in my attic somewhere. It was a long letter, handwritten, because everything was back then, apologizing to me. And at the time, it infuriated me. Like, you just think a stupid letter, like it's an apology.
I looked at it as him giving me a list of excuses and these false promises of why I should put my safety aside and he should be able to remarry my mom and move back home. I was not at all in a place to receive it. And I feel it was a mistake to give it to me. I think that I was told to read it because I somehow owed it to my dad because he was making this apology. I just find that horrific. It didn't do me any good at the time. If anything, it was more damaging because it really just drove home that I had no voice, that it didn't matter what I said. It was all about him. So those are examples where sometimes an apology is not the right thing to do. In typical fashion, Richard spends an entire chapter delving into the wheres and the whys and the what fors around the step. We're not really talking about the step itself. So making an amends. So he talks a lot in this chapter about the different things that go into making an amends on the part of the apologizer. So that would be the alcoholic who's in recovery. It starts off by defining wisdom. And so Western religion uses the word wisdom, ultimate knowledge, having wisdom, whereas Eastern religions tend to refer to wisdom as skillful means. So skillful means, the means in a skillful manner to accomplish something or solve something or do something. So I like one is sort of a descriptive word. You have wisdom, you are wise. And one is action, skillful means. It makes me think like I'm doing something. So common sense wisdom or skillful means no longer really represents common sense in our generation. We've gotten away from really relying on those before us to provide us with answers and guidance on problems as they arise. Our country and our society, not just our country, but our society looks at old people as obsolete and stupid and okay, boomer, like it's easy to insult an old person by calling them old. But in many, many tribal cultures and indigenous cultures and small, remote cultures, the old people are the ones you go to with your questions because they've lived it. They've lived it several times over. And even if they haven't lived your experience, they've lived enough experiences to have wisdom for you, to have skillful means to help you with your next challenge. So we are a culture with many elderly people and have no or very little elderly wisdom that we live by. In Christianity, Jesus ultimately was the master teacher. Any prophet of any religion would be the master teacher. In the Baha'i faith, it's Baha'u'llah. In the Muslim faith, it's Muhammad. Every religion has their teacher, their prophet, their founder. So Jesus was the master teacher, and he really did teach us to learn and grow from our mistakes and to take them in and understand when they were wrong and to repair them when we could. As humanity, as humans over the last 2,000 plus years, what we've done is, we meaning religious organizers like clergy and people that run churches, is we've spent all of our time convincing everyone of Jesus's divine station, of his divinity. Son of God, just reminding us over and over that Jesus is bigger than any of us because he's a direct descendant of the Lord, right? He never called himself the Son of God. Jesus called himself the Son of Man. And his method of teaching was never listen to what I say, obey what I say. It was follow me. It wasn't worship me. It was follow me. Follow me and do what I do. So in many ways, Jesus was like a saved old man, even though he died when he was 33. The biggest piece of step 9 is it gives us skillful means to protect both our own selves, our own humanity, and to liberate the humanity of others. So if you did something horrible to someone and you know that that weighs heavy on them, and you know that an apology would make it better, then it's your obligation is such a negative word, but it's your gift. It's your honor to do so, to rectify the situation if you can, open the door to love, and may have a genuine apology. And not everything can be done and remedied with an apology. That's where indirect amends come in. The whole theory of making a list of people and deciding who you can apologize to face and who you might need to apologize to by your words and actions or in a remote way is the whole concept of step 9, right? And the whole idea that you initiate the apology means that the door is open for the relationship to be repaired. You opened it. You're the one that made the transgression. You're the one that attempts to apologize. Whether or not that apology is accepted, you've opened the door. And it will stay open until you decide to close it. So I don't do well with long open doors. I like resolution. I want the resolution to keep the door open always. I know that that doesn't always happen. And I've learned, Roy has taught me well, that sometimes a closed door is the very best thing. But step 9 is what gets you to that point. It gets the struggling and recovering alcoholic to understand that probably did a lot of shit when you were drunk all the time, and you really need to make it right. Even if you can't ever fix what you did, you can't unlive it or undo it. All you can do is apologize for it and use it to become better. I get frustrated when people apologize to me for the same thing over and over. So it's making me think about when I do that or when I am accused of doing that. And two things happen. I see the pattern in myself that maybe I'm apologizing because I think I know what I'm apologizing for. And then I do it again. And so was I really sorry the first time? Or did I even know what I was apologizing for? So both of those things come up for me. But I know Kenny will apologize again and again for certain things. And I finally say to him, stop, you're not sorry, or you wouldn't do it again and again. You've apologized for this 9,000 times. Don't apologize anymore because you're not sorry. You're just sorry that I'm upset. One thing I've learned with Carolina is that sometimes what's bothering me in someone else is actually a reflection of myself. And that's true for everybody. When somebody's really mistreating you or accusing you of things, usually they're doing the very thing they're accusing you of. And this is especially true in relationships with narcissistic people. They are master projectors. And so in this whole amends process, you have to figure out, where might I have been projected? How do I make an amends for that? Richard goes on in chapter 9 to really talk about the amazing quality of the second half of this step, which is accept when to do so would injure you or them. And he goes into the different levels of truth. And it's not truth or lying, but sometimes it's how much does someone have the right to know? So he says, not everything needs to be told to everybody all the time. And a number of times I've had this said to me, like, why do you say all that? Mr. and Mrs. Ludi used to be so angry with me when I would talk about addiction in the newspaper articles, or when I lost my job, when I would talk about some of the details. They would just say, why do you tell people this stuff? And I just feel that I'm not authentic if I'm projecting myself to be something that I'm not. I'm meant to be disingenuous. And I have a hard time with that. So I just blurt it all out. The first thing I ask people when they read my book is, do you still like me? And they look at me in a puzzled way, but, I'm honest in that book. I tell a lot of truth in that book. That's not necessarily helpful to me. And we'll get into that right here. So not everything needs to be told to everybody all the time. Some amends are good deeds, behavior changes that are wise due to what you did. So the example of you beat your dog and now your dog is dead and you can't, undead your dog and apologize. So you just don't ever beat anyone and a dog again. Sometimes you make the amends by changing your behavior, even though the person you hurt doesn't know that you did so. If it wouldn't be helpful for them to know this. And that, to me, that's a lot of victims of violent crime. Their abuser or their criminal's apology isn't always helpful. Maybe years and years down the road, but sometimes not so much right away. Discernment of what the other needs to hear and what they have the right to hear is a big piece of a quality amends. So if you're apologizing for something and some of the information in your apology would hurt the person, you leave that out. It's not that you're not being honest. You're only giving them what they can handle. You're giving them what they need to know and what will make the amends a positive thing. And I know that sort of sounds like you're deciding ahead of time what they need to hear, but that's where the discernment comes in. How much do I have to share of this to have a positive amends? And that will be a huge process for me as I go through this process. Truth is not just what happens, but what any party has the right to know or can handle responsibly. So we can't demand an acceptance of our amends. We can't say you have to be sorry, you have to accept my apology. All we can do is offer it with humility and grace and walk away and let the person do with it what they will. And we have to do it in a way that tells them what they need to know in a way that they can manage. We aren't making this amends to fix us. In the long haul, we are. But a specific apology is not about making the alcoholic feel better. It's about holding the alcoholic accountable to a mean thing in the process of making it right. It's not to feed the ego. It's to save humanity. It's to create love. There are those with a right to know. There are those who it's none of their business, and others who will misuse it. So when I think of a lot of the apologies I could give to Kenny, he has a right to know a lot. When I think of his children and how they will take his side against me all the time, a lot of what I apologize to Kenny for is none of their business. So while I might need to make an amends to his children on my treatment of him, I don't include everything I did to Kenny in my amends to them. My amends to them would simply be, I realize I hurt your dad, and I'm here to just say I'm sorry, and I don't need anything from it. I'm working through this. That would be that. My amends to Kenny for the very same things would be very different. And then others will misuse it. And my biggest example of this always goes back to Amy. and how we would have these tender conversations. And I talked about AA helping me so much with not feeling like I needed to make up stories to protect myself. And she took that and said, "Oh, you admit you're a compulsive liar." I know I bring that up over and over, but it really rankles me. And I work very hard to let it go. And in many ways I have, but it just hurts me. So some of the different levels, an example in the book of this sort of partial apology is like this. So an unwelcome guest knocks on the door, and I open the door, and it's someone that wants to see my mother. And I know my mother does not want to see them. So I could simply say, "She's not here," to the person at the door. Now, if my mother's in the living room or upstairs, I'm not telling the truth, except I'm telling a measure of truth. Because in my head, I say, "For you. She is not here for you." So I'm protecting my mother from the person that she doesn't want to see. This is an example. I don't know that in reality this would work because, again, I would be making decisions for my mother. But if I knew somebody was at the door that my mother did not want to see, then that person wouldn't be allowed, right? So that's a measure of truth. Not everyone has a right to know everything. Richard goes on to say that truth is not just factual truths. That's part of it, a list of what happened, a description of the event, but a combination of both text and context, style and intent. So I think back to the movie The Sixth Sense. I've used this example a lot. And you watch the whole movie not knowing that Bruce Willis's character is dead. And then you rewatch certain scenes and they show the exact same scene. But now that you know he's dead, you see the scene in a completely different way. Both versions of those scenes are true, but you change the context and the meaning of the scene is completely different. This is how truth can be sometimes. So people who are manipulative can take truth and manipulate it to meet their needs. And so this whole amends process is sort of the whole major purpose of step 9 is to mediate and rectify and soothe and medicate humanity in this way. So the 12 steps are essentially about two things. So it talks about all 12 steps. The whole 12-step process is about two things: making amends. Because think back in the very beginning, we have to give our faults over to God. We have to list them. We have to love ourselves. We have to radically accept God's love for us. We have to give it over. We have to accept a higher power. It's all about forgiveness. It's all about making amends, self-amends, amends to ourselves, accepting amends from God and from others, right? And then keeping us from hurting one another further. So when you're actively practicing the 12 steps, you don't repeat the offense. And this is where we go back to the dry drunks that don't drink anymore, but they don't change their behavior. One of Kenny's children writes the nasty text messages. He's continued this horrifying behavior. He's not working the program in that way. I pray that someday he will. I'm manifesting it. So then it says, even sincere people can do a lot of damage with information they are not prepared to handle. Even sincere people can do a lot of damage with information they're not prepared to handle, and often make rash judgments that are not true or helpful. Social media times 1,000. How many times have you seen a post and it just gets your ire up and you fire a response back? I am better now. The number of long responses I type out and then I delete and never post are too many to count. I used to post them all. And now I realize that sometimes it's not my place to say. I did a whole podcast episode on this in May about just the beginning of Pride Month, actually, late May, early June. And I was giving people hell for being mean on social media. And my giving them hell was no different than what they were doing. And it was a really good learning experience for me, but it relates right back to step 9, where yes, you need to make amends. And if you can't make an amend to somebody without making the situation worse, figure out a different way to do it. And that's where the amend is for you. And then you're putting that energy out into the universe, so will hopefully help the person that you hurt. So it's interesting. So now we get into the breathing lessons, right? The questions and the lessons. So this chapter is called Skillful Means, which I like. I like that he gives the chapters names along with the steps. So again, step 9 is made amends. Look at your list and made amends to those, direct amends to those that you could. So the first question talks about Jesus touching people when he helped them. He put his hands on their head or have, physical interchange with them. So Father Richard writes, step 9 is telling us how to use skillful means to both protect our own humanity and to liberate the humanity of others. Set that humanity free. It also states that our amends to others should be direct. That's a face-to-face, wife to your eyes, I'm sorry. It's specific, personal, and concrete. In other words, probably not an email or a tweet. How comfortable are you with having difficult conversations face to face? So I'll just read what I wrote and then talk about it a bit. A lot of direct face to face communication is worse for me than the actual conversations end up being. It's like being nervous for a race, and the minute the gun goes off, the nerves go away and you execute the race. So the thought of it, when I think of some people I could potentially need to go apologize to, the thought of doing it is anxiety producing. I think once the conversation starts, I'll be fine. I'm often quick to jump in and interrupt. So facilitated amends might be better for me. And I have specific people in mind for these types of facilitated amends where maybe I have somebody with me that knows the story. I don't know. Social media and texting have hindered proper communication, and the social and political landscape shows this. One of the biggest damaging things of COVID was a whole generation of kids spent a year and a half to 2 years communicating primarily via text message and Zoom. You can text anything you want. You can post anything you want from the safety of your living room or the safety of your bedroom, and nothing happens to you immediately. Or if it does, it's all on the phone, but you're safe in your house. So the things that you can say to people to their face are vastly different than what you can text or spew out there on social media. I remember a school board meeting. I was pregnant with Jack, and I wasn't super much trying to hide it anymore. I was beyond the 22-week mark, and it was a remote meeting. We were at Concord High School in the auditorium, and I stood up to pass something out, and I sat back down, and there was a chat column on the side, and people could ask questions. But there was always this ridiculous chat going on. And somebody wrote, "Is Barb Higgins pregnant?" Now, I had told nobody. So I was horrified because nobody would stand up in a meeting and raise their hand and say, "Are you pregnant?" And this was a public meeting. So I fired back, "Are you body shaming me in public? This is against school rules. If you are a student in a district, you could be suspended for this. I'm not quite sure. Would you stand up and raise your hand and ask this out loud? Why don't you come on down here and ask me to my face?" So you all need to stop. And so there were no more comments the rest of the night. And the person, of course, didn't have their username was like a nickname. And that didn't know who it was. That's an example of how communication in my mind has been devastated by COVID because it's taught kids that they can say whatever they want and there isn't any repercussion. So the next question is about accept when to do so would harm them or others. So yes, you need to make an amends, but you can't do it directly all the time. Sometimes you can't at all. So the question is, write about a time when someone rebuffed your attempt to apologize. Write about a time when waiting to apologize paid off. Reflect on the differences and similarities between the two situations. In my friendship with Robin, the first time she decided she was never going to talk to me again, I went to her house with cake, and I knew she was angry with me. I didn't understand the depth of the anger. Gracie and I were at a birthday party at Flips. She didn't come. So we brought her birthday cake. We brought her a piece of cake and we rang the doorbell. And she's like, "Get the hell out of here." And I said, "Gracie and Molly have cake for you. I'm in the car." Because I waited in the car. You can't be mad at them. And she wouldn't answer the door. She wouldn't come and take the cake. So came back in the car and I'm like, "She's mad at me." And they were devastated. Like, "Why is she mad at us? Like, what kind of grown-up treats kids like this?" It was a huge lesson for all of us. It was a sad day, pouring rain. I'll never forget it. And that months later, that was in, June. And it wasn't until March, the following March, that we even spoke to one another again. So then one where I waited, my friend Polly, her mom died, and I didn't go to the funeral. It was just a few weeks after Jack was born. It was a freezing cold, rainy day. I didn't have any support, like anyone at home. And I don't do funerals well. I've been to maybe 3 since Molly died. I've missed a gazillion because they're really hard on me. I just feel sometimes like I'd rather wait and go to the grave and have my goodbye there and not be surrounded by people. Right? Sometimes it's just difficult. So I didn't go, but it was Polly. And I should have gone. I should have gone. She wouldn't talk to me or speak to me or acknowledge Jack for a long time. And I knew better than to reach out. I reached out to a couple of other people, and the advice I was given was give it time. So what, again, reunited us was she had some serious health issues and had to have surgery and needed a lot of support. And you can be mad at me all you want, Polly. I'm still going to support you. And she was willing at that time to accept the love and support and understand that we have to make it right. And so we started talking to each other again. And it was about 2 months after that, we were driving to a concert that we finally had the conversation. We have to have the conversation. And I just said, "I'm sorry. As much as these things were hard for me, you're my best friend, and I had no business not going to your mother's funeral, and I'm sorry." And we could talk about it. And the beautiful thing about Polly is she understood the dynamics of my brain, and she understood that Jack was, 3, 4 weeks old, but she understood it, but it didn't take away the hurt. So those are 2 really opposite examples of in very different people as well. In the current situation I'm in with a friend of mine, who I'm keeping anonymous. I don't know what to do. This is one I'm just going to have to wait and really let things filter and settle because she thinks I know exactly what I did and I don't have an idea. Yeah. I'm in this dilemma where I don't think it's all that bad, but until I really know what she's talking about, I don't know. So I just sort of send love into the universe for her. So if not done skillfully, an apology can actually make the problem and hurt worse. And the 12 steps reflect such experience. Not everything needs to be told to everybody all the time and in full detail. Sometimes that only increases the hurt, the problem, and the person's inability to forgive. This all takes wise discernment and often sought out advice from others. So this was me with Polly really holding back and waiting and asking, what do I do? So the question says, who has been an elder or wise mentor in your life? How has their advice helped you in difficult situations? How might it help you discern and clarify your approach to step 9? I had to sit for a long time and think about mentors in my life. Molly's death was just such a cement block fall, just such a mic drop in a bad way, that I don't know that I've had a specific mentor since her death. I mean, if anyone listening feels like they're my mentor, please correct me. I have withdrawn in a million ways. I'm not the social butterfly I once was. I'm not the hugger I once was. I have a really hard time, a lot of the time, being okay. So my first most great mentor, of course, would be Coach Louie. I was one of a gazillion athletes that he coached, and we were in constant contact till the year he died. We never ever lost contact or connection, and he never stopped mattering to me or being a huge piece of my life. And I never stopped listening to his advice. Did I always follow his advice? Probably not, or not very well. But he never left. He never left me. Bruce Lehane, my college coach, who's also in heaven now. He was a pretty amazing mentor for me. He was very underspoken, very soft spoken, and he was another one who could look back on incidences and times and realize the error of his ways. When Molly died, he was devastated for me, just really devastated for me. He was so kind. I remember going to a track meet and seeing him there, and he had just been diagnosed with ALS. And I said, "You don't deserve this." And he's like, "Well, you don't deserve Molly's death. I'm so sorry." We had this wonderful visit. We had this amazing goodbye when he knew he was days away from dying. I went down to say goodbye, and Leslie let me climb right in bed with him because he couldn't move. He was just in bed, but he was wide awake and he could nod his head, but he was just gone. And I held his hand and I just thanked him for being so kind to me, for understanding my craziness. I told him he better find Molly for me and make sure she's okay. It was incredible. And there was some amending in there because I was a lot to deal with as an athlete. I brought up funny stories and just gave him all the love that I could give. So he would be a mentor to me. When I think of my teaching career, Clint Cogswell was a great mentor to me. We had some big disagreements on the school board, and I saw a side of him I didn't like. But he's still somebody that I would go to for advice. He was amazing to me as well when Molly died. He really rose up at that time. He was fantastic. And then other mentors, Bill Whitmore, he's not a lot older than me, but he was a wise person. And as I matured in my career, I really came to appreciate him. So those are some people that are mentors in my life. When I think of women, like what female mentors do I have? And I think right now I would have to say 2 of them are my Nana Quimby and my big Aunt Connie, and they're in heaven. They're not even here on earth. But anytime I go for a reading, they come right through. Like I know they're with me all the time. All the time. I can feel it. I dream about them. I think back to teachers I had. So Julie Barnum, my guidance counselor in high school, she would be a female mentor for me, for sure. Joni Benoit, my college coach, she would be a mentor for me. She's an amazing human being. And part of our, BU track, first NCAA team, BU group, we have this text thread that's fantastic. With the Olympics, it's been great. We're just talking back and forth to each other. So those are some of my mentors. And I wrote here, quite honestly, I'm looking for mentorship. I'm struggling to identify any current mentors I might have. I have another one that came to mind, another dude, Dan Baram. He was a CrossFit coach at Amends. He doesn't work at Amends anymore. And Dan was someone you either loved him or you hated him. There was no middle ground with Dan, which is maybe why I liked him, because he was relatable. But he could insult you and compliment you in one breath. I would call him out on it. We had some wonderful exchanges. And I think sometimes there are certain things, if I was struggling, I could reach out and he'd be somebody that would be like, yeah, I can help you with that. So next question. What people so often want to hear in salacious and gossipy detail has increasingly been fed by our media saturated society. Yeah, we should feel like we have a right to know. Our desire to know has become a right to know. Gossip is not a right, but a major obstacle to human love and spiritual wisdom. Paul lists it equally with much more grievous sins, yet most of us do it rather easily. In the Baha'i faith, I've talked about this. In the Kitab-i Aqdas, which is the book of laws, there are like 152 references to backbiting and gossiping, and like 5 to drugs and alcohol. The tongue is the most dangerous weapon we have. The hurt we inflict on people with what we say to them in our words is immeasurable, and it stirs things up. I look at all the gender gossip around the Olympics right now, and the victims are all of the people involved. Women are the victims, men are the victims, trans men and women are the victims. Nobody comes out of all of this insinuation and gossipy backbiting proclamations as true. Nobody comes out okay. That's a good example. All of politics in our country, especially, go to this. Politicians, their campaign speeches aren't how they're going to help the country. It's a list of transgressions that the people they're going against have made. No. That's just awful. In every religion, your tongue is your biggest weapon. So the question is, we have a myth of total disclosure in American culture that is not always fair or even helpful. Just because something is factually true does not mean everyone can handle it or even needs to handle it or has a right to the information. We need to pray and discern about what the other needs to hear and also has the right to hear. Write about a situation in your life where you need to heed this advice. Be honest about your motives in revealing personal details to others. Yeah, sometimes you tell people things because you know it'll make them feel bad. Well, okay, how is that helpful to anybody? Maybe you don't like feeling bad, so don't make someone else feel bad with your words. Sometimes I can see that. So I wrote, my motives in revealing the complete truth typically come from being falsely accused or described about something. And I want to set the record straight. So sometimes I'll tell complete truths that paint a very different picture because I want people to know who I am. I also want to show others that they're not alone. So oftentimes I'll share things because I know other people keep them secret as well. Common experiences can create comfortable communities, especially around uncomfortable things. That's why support groups are so helpful because you can talk to a group of people that totally get it. I know a lot of people think support groups are bad because you're keeping yourself in the problem, except that the way that you serve your fellow mankind is to be the experienced person who's lived with the problem. If I left all my grief groups right now, someone that's just lost their child won't function. I'm friends with a woman on Facebook now who lost her son a month ago. And already her husband's telling her she needs to pick it up and move along. 1 month. I didn't get out of my lawn chair for like 6 months. I didn't shower with any regularity. I didn't work for months. It's devastating. So I was able to say, hey, I'm 8 years in. I couldn't even imagine 8 days at your point, let alone 8 years. It's going to be okay. And it's going to be awful. And then it's going to be okay. And it's going to be awful. And I just told her what worked for me. And she was so grateful to hear it. Like it just made her understand that it will never be okay. And it will be okay. So yeah, that's a good one there. Skillful means is not just to make amends, but to make amends in ways that do not injure others. This is a huge piece of it. Truth is not just factual truths, which is the great mistake of fundamentalists, according to Richard in his book, but a combination of both text and context, style and intent. Our supposed right to know every truth about our neighbor too often feeds those with pre-existing malice, bias, or mental imbalance, and leads to spin, distortion, and misinterpretation of supposed facts. Ian Roy, to me, hit my last restraining order hearing. Oh. It's so good, though, for me to be able to step out with perspective and look back at all this and really see, does it absolve me from my part? No. Are there things I could make amends for to the people in my life like Amy and Roy? Of course. We all hurt one another. I wouldn't want to get into an amends contest with them because then the whole point is lost. But it's always important to realize you receive and you give, always. Our lives are never completely our own. See? Write about ways in which some of the deepest truths of your life have had an impact on other people. Reflect on how to respect their privacy as well as your own as you go through a program of recovery. So obviously, my grief groups, child loss. My experiences in that make me the go-to person for a lot of people, as other people are my go-to people. I can utter a sentence, and even if like I think of Brandy, and that's Jack's mother and Marilee's mother, Lisa, and so totally different people, totally different lives, totally different circumstances around the death of their kids. Both of them totally get me because what they get is the loss of a child in a traumatic, sudden way that makes no sense. And so they're huge, huge supports for me all the time because we have that commonality. So I wrote some of my deepest truths currently being shared are in my book, Motherland. They're done in the spirit of honesty and self acceptance because I talk about leaving my kids and going with Roy. And I talk about getting involved with drugs after Molly's death. I talk about it. I talk about all of it because there's nothing pretty about it. I initially included details in my book that were not necessarily mine to share. I did a lot of editing. So I had to tell the story authentically. So I told Virginia the whole story, every sordid detail. And she wrote it that way because you have to write the whole story. You can't modify the story as you write it, or it is not even close to the truth. And then we sat down and took out about 250 pages worth of words. That's a lot of words. We cut the book in half because it was too much information for one story. My life and everything included in the first draft of Motherland probably could be 3 books. So that was an incredible process, but the authenticity of the story now remains. So all we've done is remove the pieces that can't be shared. We haven't altered anything else. That whole multiple levels of truth thing. I can understand abuse victims and sexual assault victims, chronic illness. I've had asthma my whole life, trigeminal neuralgia. I've had tons of surgeries. There is a lot I can speak to that provide support for others. So I'm really lucky. The 12 steps are about 2 things, making amends and keeping us from wounding one another further. Too much earnest zeal here, spilling the beans on everyone's laps, we usually create a whole new set of problems. Right. You want to create more drama by trying to make up for the drama you've already created. Many people simply do not have the proper filters to know how to process ideas or information. Such people often misuse them without intending to misuse them. Even sincere people can do a lot of damage. So this is, again, who do you apologize to and how? And a lot of it depends on them and not you, and not even the transgression, so to speak. So I said, all my mistakes are tied to complex situations where an amends is either inappropriate or unhelpful, if not harmful to both me and the others. So for example, knocking on Roy's door and trying to make amends, first of all, he would never even open the door. Second of all, it would hurt his girlfriend's feelings and it would cause unnecessary hurt. So whatever I might have to apologize to him for, I would do it in a different way. Maybe I'd send him a letter. I could do that, or a card. I don't know. It would be, he's far down on the list. So I have a list. So I made a list of people and I've said I have not acted my best with these people. The tricky part is separating all of the moving pieces. And my list of people are also people that have really hurt me, like really hurt me. So Robin, of course, and Stephanie, Sev, he was a coach of mine that I dated for a while. That was a very unhealthy relationship on both of our parts. I think we did not bring out the best in each other. I love him dearly with all my heart, but we do better as friends. My first husband, Eric, B, Kenny's daughter, and Kenny, one of Kenny's sons, and Kim, the woman I rented my house to at first. All of these people that I feel owe me an amends, but when I really sit down, what I did for my amend list is I'm like, anyone I'm in an argument with, anyone that doesn't speak to me anymore, anyone that is, and I have a much longer list. I have Laura Lynn, I have Allie, a lot of people. It's like, okay, they don't talk to me anymore. I don't know what I did. So, that's a common thread for me. So if I'm doing the same thing to everybody, somebody needs to write it in red ink and plaster it to the windshield of my car. But my journey will be a lot of step 8ing, right? Really going through the list and really filtering out who will a direct amends be helpful to, who will it not, and how will they help me as well. So our tasks here were just to look at our chapter 8 list, and then for each person on the list, prayerfully respect on whether making an amends for that hurt would be in their best interest. So we're thinking about them, not about us. It's not about, tit for tat and checking it off the list. It's about fixing it and making it better. And there are lots of ways to do it that don't involve any direct contact with the people. So if there is some direct action you can take, commit to doing it. But if you're not sure, do nothing, cause no harm. And then For a week or two, notice how much of the news and social media are concerned with the private lives of celebrities and even ordinary people. Well, that's a lot, right? Reflect on how you encourage that sort of coverage by your attention and willingness to comment and gossip within your own circle of acquaintances. Yeah, I can fall into this easily, and it's not a good place to be at all. Take time to ask yourself if these actions make you feel more or less secure and why that might be the case. Then ask yourself if it makes you feel more or less willing to be open about your life in an appropriate way. This, I always think of step 9 as the actual act of making the amends. There is so much work in step 9 that has nothing to do with talking to any of these people. You're making the amends by growing and learning inside and becoming a better person because of what you did or what transpired or what happened. I remember when I was doing the program in my late 20s and early 30s, I did not have this deep understanding at all, which makes sense. I'm twice as old as I was then. I've lived as many years since then as I had lived when I went and did these steps. And I remember at the time I was just still in my people pleaser, trying to please my sponsor. I want to be a good, sober person. I want to do it right. You know, it's still good work, but it's hard to live a life in recovery. It can be really tricky. So that's step 9. We are 3 laps done in the 4-lap race of the 12 steps. So 10, 11, and 12 will bring us home. So I'm excited about it. As you're hearing this, we're into September or close to it, which means Gracie's off to Disney sometime soon in the next few days. I'm going to miss her like crazy. I'm excited to be in the parks, though. Disney in September is wonderful. It's not crowded. It's hot, but not as hot as July. So it's a good time to be there. It's hurricane season and storm season, so maybe that is also why it's not so crowded. But we'll have 10 days or so on Florida and then come home without her, just like we did before. All right, so listen, to be good to yourself. Make an amends to yourself. Like sometimes I think I could just apologize to myself in a million ways. And the beauty of the amends to someone else, though, is that if it's an amends that's the right thing to do, or if it's one you have to do on your own, you are doing it for yourself. You're making yourself better in the process of making an amends. So be good to yourself. Be good to someone else. Maybe it's making an amends. Maybe it's not. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.